They brought an excavator to a sunrise and called it compliance. The bucket's teeth chewed through cedar siding like a bad sentence, the kind that shouldn't have been written and certainly shouldn't have been enforced. A yellow tape sagged in the breeze that ran off the lake and through the empty great room where I'd watched storms cross in sheets. The HOA president stood in a branded windbreaker, like a coach who thinks whistles equal authority. A city inspector held a clipboard. A contractor squeezed the throttle, and my lake mansion, the one I'd framed room by room because architecture is how some people pray, lurched forward under a machine I could have stopped a year ago if I'd cared less about winning the whole game. "Stop work," I said, calmly, because calm is a weapon if you sharpen it. The excavator braked. Everyone turned like you do when the soundtrack changes. I wasn't yelling. I didn't have to. I had a document case under my arm that smelled like leather and endings. "You don't have authority," the president snapped, and I almost thanked her. She telegraphed the entire day in one sentence. Their narrative was tidy. I'd violated setback, changed materials without ARC approval, expanded a deck into common shoreline, ignored fines, lost my appeal, failed to cure. The board voted to demolish non-compliant portions to restore uniformity and safety. They served me with a final notice at 4:56 p.m. on a Friday and scheduled the excavator like it was a parade float. They'd sent letters for months, the polite ones, then the mean ones, then the ones that try on legal words the way teenagers try on thrift store suits. They wanted a warning to become a ruling by repetition. The thing about words is that the first ones matter most. Declarant, master deed, successor developer, declarant rights not expired, easements, common area, sub-os association. The thing about dirt is that it remembers who it belonged to and whether you wrote that down. What the HOA president didn't know, what she'd been too busy practicing speeches to ask, was that the previous developer, bankrupt and bitter, had sold me two things, 2 years earlier. A note secured by the Master Association's common property, and, more importantly, every unexercised, unexpired declarant right under the master deed. He'd kept them in a file nobody read because they were for attorneys and not fun. I read them like a priest reads scripture, because if you ever plan to speak softly and carry a big stick, you should know how heavy the stick really is. Declarant rights are boring until someone swings them. They allow the person named or their successor to control architectural standards, appoint directors, amend plats, reallocate common areas, and crucially veto anything that interferes with the overall plan of development. Most neighborhoods let those rights expire at some milestone. Lot sold, years passed, something sensible. Ours didn't. Ours tied the sunset to substantial completion of phases B and C that never got built because the last developer mistook leverage for luck, and leverage ran out. When the bank foreclosed on his portfolio, they missed the file with the magic words. He sold it to me for less than the cost of that excavator's hydraulic hoses and said, "Have fun." I said, "I don't do fun, I do paper." So I watched the excavator warm up the way you watch a chess opponent open with a gambit you invited. I let it nudge the cedar like you let a bully throw one shove so the cameras catch it. I pulled a roll document out of the case and placed it on the hood of the inspector's truck, as if trucks were built for moments like this. "Assignment of declarant rights," I said. "Book 2043, page 17. Exhibit A, Master Deed Section 3.1 through 3.9 Declarant Powers. Exhibit B, amendment filed last month extending the architectural controlled term under Section 3.7b, and reasserting shoreline classification under Exhibit C. Exhibit C, the ground lease for the lakeshore deck area you think is common. It isn't. The association subleases it from the master. I own the master." Silence is a currency. I spent it for 3 seconds and then paid with more. I said, "Here is the assignment from Harbor Ridge Development to me," tapping the first page. "Here is the joinder by the Master Association acknowledging the assignment. Here is the acceptance of assignment by me. Here is the notice to sub-associations, including yours, recorded 2 weeks ago. Here is the letter you ignored because it was too long, in which I advised you not to schedule a machine for this morning." The president recovered with indignation masquerading as confidence. She said, "We have legal counsel. We voted. We followed process." I nodded. "I know. You follow the process your bylaws talk about. You forgot the master document your neighborhood lives inside. The master deed isn't a newsletter. It's the spine.
You plan to cut off one of the ribs without asking the spine's permission. I looked at the inspector, whose eyes had gone from bored to awake. City has jurisdiction on building safety. City doesn't adjudicate private governance. The master deed and the assignment are private governance. Your demo permit is for removal of non-compliant deck extension. The deck is on leasehold ground the master controls. No signature from the master, no authority to demo. He swallowed. The city badge on his collar looked heavier than it had 5 minutes ago. I'm not here to interpret HOA law. I nodded. Good. You're here to look at public safety. This is private property with private governance dispute. Please issue a stop work order until the court clarifies authority. I didn't need to say liability for him to hear it. He glanced at the excavator, the lake, the cameras, the president, the paperwork. He reached for his pad. Stop work, he said, and the operator killed the engine like someone pulled the plug on a cartoon annoyance. The president tried for one more volley. You can't just claim to own the neighborhood, she said, scorn heavy like cheap perfume. You bought a house, not a city. I slid one more page forward. Assignment of developer's mortgage on Master Association common parcel, recorded 6 months back after I bought a defaulted note for pennies and foreclosed the day their treasurer forgot how calendars work. I don't own a city. I own what your board never bothered to read. And I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to make you stop hurting me with a rulebook you don't understand. Neighbors had gathered because nothing attracts witnesses like Audacity meeting paper. Phones recorded. Someone whispered he owns the whole thing and let the sentence grow legs it hadn't earned yet. I said, not the whole thing, because accuracy is how you keep power polite. Common elements under the master, sure leasehold and declarant control over architectural approvals until substantial completion. You still own your houses, you still have a board, you still have meetings. You just don't get to swing a machine at my home without asking the person your own documents say you have to ask. A journalist I didn't invite, but had expected, stepped forward. Is it true you let them push this far just to... He gestured at the stop order, the excavator, the entire morning. I let them push this far to fix a bad habit with a big lesson. Small letters didn't work. Big paper does. I prefer persuasion. They chose spectacle. I folded the assignment back into the case. We'll do this in a conference room now, not on a shoreline. The wind shifted. The lake went flat. The excavator sat like a dog that just learned stay. In the quiet, I heard my grandfather's voice, the one that told me to buy that handsome developer's file when other people were buying glossy renderings. You don't win by shouting, he used to say. You win by choosing where the shouting happens. Let's move this inside, I said, not to be dramatic, but to remind everyone the world is better when contracts replace buckets. The president opened her mouth to say something about we, and I held up a hand. Not you and me, the right we. You, your counsel, the master's counsel, the city, the lender, and the title insurer. We'll read this out loud, then we'll behave. The conference room had 5 chairs that thought they were in charge and 1 sentence that actually was. The city attorney slid the stop work order across the table like a dealer. The lender's counsel capped her pen. The title insurer opened a folder labeled Endorsements, Potential. The HOA president stared at the window as if the lake could vote. Their counsel cleared his throat. Let's start with scope, he said, and I almost smiled. Scope was 3 words. Who owns what? I put the master deed at the center and the recorded assignment beside it, a cross on a map. You can argue what you want in your newsletter, I said, but your excavator only moves if this page says it can. Their counsel tried the usual footholds. Assignments can be contested, he said. Declarant rights can be abused. Public policy disfavors perpetual developer control. My lawyer nodded, as if we were discussing weather. We agree on every caution and none of the conclusions, he said. Rights don't perpetuate here. They sunset on substantial completion of phases that were never built, and were expressly extended by recorded amendment 6 weeks before your client noticed the shore. The Master Association acknowledged the assignment. The sub-associations were noticed. The declarant controls architectural approvals and shoreline classifications until completion. They chose violence. We chose recordation. The city attorney raised a hand as if we were in a classroom.
We're not refereeing your governance, she said. Our issue is safety and permits tied to authority. I slid the shoreline lease to her. The deck sits on leasehold ground under the master, I said. No signature from the master on your permit application. The city can't enforce a private rule by demolishing something on property controlled by a party who didn't consent. She nodded once, memorizing the sentence she would later say into a camera. The lender's counsel leaned in. We have collateral that can't be occupied, she said, and a timeline that looks worse than press. My lawyer kept her eyes. You have options that look better than litigation, he said. Ratify approvals properly, rescind unlawful action, recognize the declarant's role, cure title defects with an endorsement, and adopt a policy that keeps excavators away from governance. The HOA president tried to wedge pride into a sentence and couldn't. He can't lord this over us forever, she said, voice thin. I didn't take the bait. I don't want to, I said. You finish your job, I finish mine, the rights sunset, the lake outlives us all. Today isn't about forever. Today is about your board reading the book you're inside. We moved to facts that add weight to words. Survey overlays, plat notes, the ground lease legal, the ARC approvals I had issued as declarant. You approve your own deck? Their counsel asked, pouncing as if gotcha were a verb that entered orders. Yes, I said, like every declarant since condominiums invented the art of not tripping over itself. There were objective standards. There were notices. There were no appeals filed because your board was too busy polishing bulldozer speeches to read them. My lawyer pushed a neat stack of certified mail slips across the lacquer. She said, he objected every step. You ignored him every time. We drafted the obvious paper. The HOA would rescind the demo authorization and acknowledge the declarant's control over shoreline classifications and deck standards. The city would leave the stop work in place for anything touching the deck until the rescission and a joint letter from council. The lender would push closings 2 weeks and press for a curative endorsement. The title insurer would issue said endorsement after the rescission and a master resolution. And we would file a stipulated order confirming authority in tolling any claims while we fixed the governance mess in daylight. I asked for one more thing that sounded symbolic and worked like a crowbar. We need a joint email to the community, I said, signed by the master and the sub-association. It will read demolition action rescinded, master deed control shoreline, declarant rights acknowledged, governance training scheduled, no further enforcement actions without legal review. The president bristled. The lender's counsel nodded. Transparency makes press go away, she said. Do it. We left the city with words everyone could stand to repeat on camera. The excavator trailed off like a chastised dog. My house stood still, scarred but standing. Cedar siding softer at the chew marks where a machine had made a point and learned one. I slept that night without hearing engines. Morning brought the other consequence you plan for and never enjoy. The HOA forum on fire. He owns us, one post screamed. He saved us, another wrote. It's a power grab, someone said. It's a policy grab, I answered once, because you get one reply to internet panic before it eats you. We scheduled a special meeting. We booked the lodge. We rented extra chairs. I wrote a speech I wouldn't need to read. The room filled with people who'd never cared about covenants and now wanted to care all at once. I opened with the only hook that works when a crowd arrives hot. I'm not your emperor. I'm your mirror. Murmurs cooled. I held up the master deed. This, I said, is older than your bylaws. It's the frame. Your board forgot the frame. I didn't move into your house to knock down a wall. I moved in to keep the roof on while we finished building what your developer promised and never delivered. I explained declarant rights in plain language. I explained sunset and completion. I drew a line between control and responsibility. Then I said the sentence that changed the room. I want to leave. It stunned them. Not the neighborhood, I said. The job. I want this file to close. I want to hand you a set of finished standards and a boring board, and I want to go back to being the man on the point fishing at dusk. Laughter. Honest. First all night. To do that, I said, we need a year of adulting. Finish the ARC handbook, reclassify the shore, align your bylaws with the master, adopt a policy that keeps excavators excavating in fines scarce and due process plentiful, train directors, and stop using excavators as punctuation. We opened the floor. People asked about everything a neighborhood asks when someone admits the spine exists. Parking, fences, pickleball lines, short-term rentals, noise. I answered as declarant when needed and as a neighbor when I wanted to remind them we share mail carriers. The president tried to reclaim narrative and discovered that competence steals oxygen faster than outrage. A motion passed to suspend all aggressive enforcement for 60 days while we rewrote the policy with council. Another motion passed to form a joint governance committee. Master, sub-associations, council, one curmudgeon, one optimist. Someone motioned to recall the president, council pointed to process and calendars. The motion became a petition that almost filled in one night. Then the lender mailed me an odd compliment dressed as a checklist. Curative conditions satisfied, the letter read. Endorsement pending recording of rescission and master resolution. The title insurer sent a draft endorsement with my name spelled right and a line I will print big on my wall. Accepting only declarant rights as assigned by Book 2043, page 17. It's nerd poetry. I watched the edge of my deck at dusk and ran my hand along the scar the excavator left in the cedar. It wasn't ugly. It was a lesson engraved in wood. I thought about the morning they arrived with a machine and a script, and I thought about the afternoon we left with a pause and a plan. And I allowed myself one private moment of pettiness. I whispered, "You picked the wrong sentence to start with." Then I went inside and made coffee and wrote the first draft of the ARC handbook. Because winning is a line, finishing is a chapter.
If Section 2 was a stop work order, Section 3 had to be a start work order on the thing that actually needed building: governance. We opened the first joint committee meeting with a table full of paper and a rule I insisted on that felt small and turned out to be the hinge. No speeches longer than a page, no documents shorter than a paragraph. The architect in me knows 3 bad remodels happen for every floor plan someone draws on a napkin. The lawyer in my lawyer knows lawsuits are what happen when napkins meet excavators. We started with the part everyone thinks is boring and is actually the keystone: an enforcement bill of rights. We wrote it like we meant it and like we might be fined if we didn't follow it. Warning first, cure period second, hearing third, fines last. 1 violation per incident, no stacking daily penalties like poker chips, no processing fees unless the document actually says processing fee, a ledger homeowners can see without begging, and a recusal requirement that would make a saint blush. No director may sit on or influence a hearing regarding their own street, their own household, or their enemies, I said, smiling at the last word because specificity is a kindness that prevents melodrama. Council added the sentence that moves an HOA from rumor mill to due process. The burden of proof is on the association. There was a silence that sounded like a group remembering they had neighbors. We moved to the ARC, architectural approvals, not because decks are more important than parking, but because the excavator was still parked in people's heads. The master ARC standards had been a set of paragraphs that read like they were written by 3 egos and a thesaurus. We turned them into a picture book. Drawings, setbacks shaded like topographic lines, shoreline zones in colors even a sunset would respect, material palettes shown on actual photos of our homes instead of renderings of a place we wished we were. We created quick approvals: paint within palette, fences within height and material, solar with glare control, docks within box, rainwater tanks, screened, 10-day turnaround with the default approved if we missed the clock. We kept full review for additions, shoreline structures, anything that touches a neighbor's view in a way that a lawsuit might one day be asked to adjudicate. The master, me, would sign shoreline approvals until completion. The subs, them, would handle the rest. Both would publish decisions within 3 days of meetings, so rumor never got a head start again. Then we picked up the shoreline classification like a surgeon picks up an instrument they've been trained to respect. We drew no wake in the cove like a salve, signed by master, endorsed by the city, enforced by the courtesy we teach children and forget to require of adults.
We set a green band where no fertilizer would touch water and no mower would scalp a frog's morning. We wrote a sign spec that looked like our place, not a state highway. Wood, serif letters, small logos, large please. We put the words Harper's Leasehold on the plat with a dashed line that says, "This matters, but doesn't divide us." Some nights the room felt like therapy. A woman who's been fined for a planter cried when we wrote warning and hearing in bold. A gruff man who likes rules like bricks bristled when we said discretion and then softened when we said standards and published and everyone. The former president tried on contrition like a jacket and found it didn't fit. She resigned the day the governance committee posted minutes with more nouns than adjectives. We didn't cheer. We thanked her for volunteer hours the way you thank a storm for reminding you your gutters need work. The lender closed 3 cabins that week after the title insurer stapled an endorsement that turned cloud into history. The city lifted the stop work order on everything that didn't touch my deck, and we signed a joint letter that read like a ceasefire with manners. Demolition rescinded, shoreline approvals through the master, executive sessions reduced to personnel and legal, meetings recorded and posted within a week. The paper did a short, dry piece with just enough poetry to make me believe in local journalism. The excavator idled while the deed spoke. Then came the part anyone who's ever fixed a thing knows. It breaks different next time. A neighbor on the far shore wanted a pergola. The sub-association denied it because the word pergola wasn't in the old list. He appealed to the master because he'd heard there was a new sheriff and mistaken me for one. We applied the new standard. Not do we like pergolas, but does a pergola within this height, this material, this setback fit the palette and block no neighbor's view or light? Approved, with lumber listed like a recipe and a sketch we uploaded so the next person would not be forced to have an opinion about pergolas without guidance. A couple wanted solar on a roof that faces the lake. Half the room turned into a glare committee. We did what adults do when new tech meets old eyes. We found panels with black frames, a layout that reads clean from shore, and a requirement for an anti-reflective coating certified by someone who has measured sunlight outside of a catalog. Approved. The HOA forum, always hungry, tried to make both into content. The posted decisions took away the oxygen, and the thread died like a match snuffed by a wet thumb. There were politics because people live here. The recall petition hit quorum in 4 days and then took 2 weeks to produce the turnout that makes a meeting feel like a parade. The treasurer who had loved fees more than minutes lost her seat by a handful. A quiet neighbor who runs a hardware store and keeps a pencil behind his ear won by a mile. I didn't vote with my thumbs on a table, I voted with my documents. Please pick people who like paper. They did. The oddest call came from the state's real estate division. We heard declarant rights were assigned without a bond. We don't police that, we got calls. I sent them the assignment, the joinder, the notice, the amendment, the resolution, and the letter that said, "We're trying very hard not to make you a character in this play." The voice laughed. "Good," they said, "we like watching without lines." I rebuilt what the excavator had chewed in a weekend with 2 carpenters who understand that cedar forgives a lot if you speak to it in the right direction. I left a small slab of unsanded scar near the corner post like a patch on a jacket. When the sun hits it at 5, it looks like a reminder instead of damage. I stood there with a coffee and watched a pontoon drift past, a couple in sun hats pointing at my house like people point at anything that makes them wonder how much a thought costs. I waved, they waved, neither of us shouted anything. That felt like progress. Neighbors started asking for a copy of the ARC handbook like you ask for a casserole recipe that actually results in a casserole. My inbox got less spicy, the city attorney sent me a link to a training on HOA law for planners, and we both pretended someone would attend. The Lake Association, perhaps out of penance, planted willow whips at 3 eroded corners I've been swearing at for a decade, and my dog peed on one and I told him we like those and laughed at myself for lecturing a mammal. Every story wants a scene that makes it shareable. Our block got one on a Thursday night when the HOA hosted a governance Q&A by the lodge fireplace. A board member who had been quiet since the excavator morning stood and said, "I've served 6 years and never read the master deed. I thought bylaws were enough. I'm sorry." No one clapped. That would have been cruel. Someone said thank you, and it sounded like a hinge finally oiled. The next week, she chaired a hearing where a fence variance got denied for the wrong reasons, and she corrected her own board on the record and cited the section number. I cheered in my car later because I'm not cool. I set a calendar appointment for 12 months out that says sunset, not because I'm running, but because declarant rights should have a goodbye date written into it like a mission has an end. We'll finish the ARC handbook, the shore map, the enforcement policy, the bylaw alignment. We'll finish Phase C in a way that looks like reality, not old marketing. Maybe the amenities are a bench and a kayak rack and access that makes wheelchairs a normal sight. Then I'll sign one last resolution that says these rights are now boring, and I'll go fish. That's the plan. Plans are a joke the lake loves. It has a sense of humor. I respect it and hope it returns the favor. There's a moment at the end of a long meeting when the air tastes like rice paper and you can almost believe adults can do hard things without a machine in the background. We found that moment. We stapled it to the wall with a motion, a vote, a recorded document, and a scar on cedar to remind us what the alternative sounds like.